This is Bettie Lou Stewart Wickham. She is the mother of 11, the grandmother of 36, and the great-grandmother of 24. 71 people are directly descended from this remarkable woman, and while much of her married life and later years is well known to her family, her childhood years are less known. Park City, Utah. This was one of only a very few towns settled by non-Mormons in the early days of the territory. It was a mining town. Great silver, gold, and lead deposits were discovered there, and by 1870, a few mines were set up. Once news spread of the opportunities, more and more mines were opened, and thousands of men and women flocked to the area to work in the mines and earn a living for their families. Men worked in the mine, and women usually found employment working in boarding houses, hotels, saloons, and restaurants. The mining industry was so successful that by the late 1890s, it was thought that Park City might supplant Salt Lake City as the primary city in Utah. At its height, Park City had a population of over 10,000. In 1927, one of the many thousands of men wanting to earn money working in the mines was William Stewart. After their marriage on May 12, 1927, William brought his new bride, Florence Huntsman, up to Park City with him while he worked in the mines. Soon after, Florence became pregnant with their first baby. There in the miners' hospital was born Bettie Lou Stewart on March 10, 1928. Here is the newspaper article announcing several people who were admitted to Miners Hospital for various injuries and illnesses, including one Mrs. William Stewart, baby girl, on March 10th. Up till that point in her life, Florence was not used to a strenuous existence. She had been rather spoiled as a child and was unaccustomed to hard work. She disliked the hardships associated with a miner's life. This soon put strains on their relationship, and though they were relatively happy together, they argued as most couples do. One day, soon after Bettie's birth, Florence's mother and father came up to visit and see the new baby and found Florence crying. William and Florence had a particularly bad argument and fight that day. At the insistence of her parents, who didn't like William in the first place, Florence took Bettie and went back to her parents' home in Torrey, Utah. William came home to find his wife and his baby gone and was devastated. He tried several times to meet with Florence after this to talk to her. But Florence's parents and family convinced her that doing so would be a sign of weakness and that leaving him was the right choice. Within a few months, Florence became weary of living with her parents and wanted to be more independent. She took Bettie up to Salt Lake and left her with her sister Vina and found work in another mining town, this time across the valley in the Ochre Range in the Bingham Canyon mine. Here, she worked as a waitress in one of the boarding houses along the narrow valley floor, so narrow only one street could fit. But William, still holding to hope of reconciliation with Florence, tried to contact her again. After having no luck in doing so, he tried one last desperate move and went to Vina's house to talk to Florence. After being refused yet again, while on the porch, he attempted suicide by slitting his throat right in front of Bettie and Vina. Though she has no memory of the startling event, Bettie was told later that she had cried and was crawling on her father as he lay unconscious. William spent several weeks in the hospital, barely surviving the ordeal. It took him a long time to get over the heartbreak he had over losing Florence. Meanwhile, Florence continued to work in Bingham. While she was there, she met a handsome German immigrant named Joe Rankers. She and Joe married on June 12, 1930. But life as a miner's wife was difficult on Florence. Joe adopted a very carefree attitude about his life and tried to make the most fun out of it. Much to Florence's despair, Joe spent most of his paychecks gambling and partying. When Florence became pregnant with Margaret, she decided to take young Bettie back to her parents' home in Torrey for the duration of her pregnancy. But weeks went by after Margaret was born, and Florence was getting very concerned because Joe hadn't yet come to visit during the entire time she was pregnant. And what was worse, hadn't come to see his new daughter. Florence was starting to think that perhaps he might never come. But 6 weeks after Margaret was born, Joe came down to Torrey, celebrated the birth of Margaret, and moved his family back up to Bingham to a little area in the town called Dinkyville. As a child, Bettie describes herself feeling as though she was closely looking into a window, peeking into a room of goings-on, which she neither understood nor was part of. She felt detached from the things happening around her. She felt like an outsider in someone else's world, trying to fit in, trying to please, verbal outbursts of frustration on occasion, guilty feelings, and a deep, deep sense of not really understanding. Life for Bettie in Dinkyville was not the best for a little girl to grow up in. They lived in shacks with wooden floors and difficult conditions.
But I remember Dinkyville, and I remember one morning getting up because I just followed my mom around like little kids do, and she started to cry, and I said, "Why are you crying?" And she was pulling things out of the floor, and it was weeds growing up in the floor, And she said, "I didn't think I'd ever have to live like this,
Bettie was a sickly child who fainted regularly due to her hypoglycemia, which was then unknown. She also had trouble sleeping because Joe enjoyed late-night parties and had them often. Often during these parties, Joe and his friends would consume his home-brewed beer. The fumes from the brewing process of Joe's bootlegged beer often made Bettie nauseous and ill. She suffered from earaches, headaches, vomiting, and fainting. Bettie's fainting spells became so bad that she sometimes would fall into a coma-like state when she did so. On one of these occasions, she was rushed to the doctor. The doctor told Bettie's mother that she needed 3 things.
But the doctor finally said, she needs an egg every day. Mom hated eggs, but she gave me an egg every day. I needed a nap every day, and I can remember screaming and shouting, making the most noise, and she'd pick me up from play and make me take the nap, and then how I'm so glad that she'd made me take the nap. I just close the pillow and think it feels so good, but I wouldn't do it nicely. I made her really have a bad fit with it.
She soon started to get well, though she still fainted a great deal in the mornings. Florence wouldn't let Bettie play with the other children very often. Most of them, including her next-door neighbors, were children of Mexican immigrant mine workers, and Florence disliked them. But Bettie still was allowed to play every now and then. Betty loved to go over there and visit because they would often eat fried dough, a treat Betty loved. In fact, she loved it so much she wanted to go over there and live. Annoyed by this, Florence told Betty to go ahead and pack her little bag and said goodbye.
She thought I wouldn't go 2 feet before I could turn around and come back. But I went over to this place and they cooked. They were just kids. Their parents were always gone, you know. They cooked flapjacks, fried dough. Oh, it was good.
Thinking that her daughter wouldn't stay too long, she was surprised when the clock struck 10 p.m. and there was no sign of Betty at home. So she went over next door to find Betty in bed.
Just there I was, sound asleep in a bed with about 5 people and a dog. And my mother was such a snob in a way. She just couldn't understand how I could be content in a mess like that.
Betty awoke and was surprised to see her mother, for in her mind she had moved out for good. Needless to say, she returned home with her mother that night and did not move in with the neighbors. She had a very giving and sharing nature about her, much to her mother's consternation. Betty was given a little red wooden chair her mother had purchased from a catalog. That made it special. Betty loved it and was very proud of it, so proud that she had to show it off to her friends. One of the children said she wanted it, so Betty gave it to her. Florence was furious, but didn't retrieve the chair because she felt that Betty didn't deserve anything because she was always giving things away. Even when she got candy, Betty would hand out to the other kids until she had nothing left for herself. Because of her mother's restrictions on who she could play with, Betty often found herself alone. She tapped into the wonderful world of imagination and make-believe, which she created for herself, where everything was easy, comfortable, and fun. She loved this aspect of her life because, as she puts it, everything went the way I wanted it to go, and it is the only time in my life where it ever did. All through her life, she would retreat to her make-believe world to get away from the hardships she endured. Some memories of her youth in Wickham involve some mishaps as well. One day, Betty, Margaret, and their mother were going to have a picnic. Betty was so excited she ran. She ran right into a parked red truck and knocked herself out. The lady in the truck later said she didn't know what happened, but the impact had shaken the whole truck. All Betty remembers was she was upset because the picnic was canceled. When baseball was in season, the family often went to Copperton. There, near the field, was a playground where Betty and Margaret played. The really big event in her childhood memories, though, was those times when she and Margaret got to go to Salt Lake City. When they came down, Florence would drop Betty and Margaret off at the Orpheum Theater in downtown Salt Lake while she ran and did errands, visited with her sister and friends. All the while, Betty and Margaret would watch the movies. Betty loved this pastime.